Hello and welcome once again to New Perspectives, a New Perspectives edition, certainly in a season where it's driven by a certain impetus that is handled by the imminent elections. And we are no doubt, like many others, find ourselves in the vortex of a certain political space where the pundits admiring and observing the intrigue as it thickens, the projections, predictions ahead of the impending elections. Today, we have as our guest Mr. Ausbert, who is the leader of the National Development Movement. Welcome, Ausbert.
Thank you very
much. To your maiden appearance on New Perspectives.
Thank you.
And in fact, Ausbert, who has for quite some time now been a contentious figure. Ausbert, his supporters will tell you, as a technocrat within the government service, efficient, organized, with great output. His detractors, and there are quite a few, who would tell you that there's the questions over integrity and, of course, his own controversy in the governance of the country when he was involved as a senior civil servant and indeed as part of the government in more recent times. What's important is that Ausbert is here finally on New Perspectives. He's not given too many major television interview appearances, but now he's here, and we're happy for that, the opportunity, Ausbert, to speak directly to the person who is very much at the center of the news in recent times. Ausbert, you're now the leader of our party, the National Development Movement, NDM. What triggered your interest and you finally triggered your entry into politics?
The National Development Movement has been around for a very long time, quite some time now. As you may recall, we formed that organization in 2004. We intended to contest the 2006 general election, but we realized then that it was more expedient than to pull out, because had we not pulled out then, we thought that all we would have done was taken enough votes away from the United Workers' Party to allow the Labour Party to win.
But even ahead of that, just tell me what triggered your Ausbert decision to enter politics. You have been in administration for quite a while.
Yes. My commitment to St. Lucia and St. Lucia's development. We are not satisfied, and I am not satisfied personally, that the current players in the political arena have the vision and have the ability to take St. Lucia where it needs to go. And therefore, I thought that with my background, my experience, and my understanding of where St. Lucia needs to go in terms of its development, that it was necessary for a group like the NDM to come together with a sole focus on development to try to enable St. Lucia to achieve the potential that it has as a developing country.
That which couldn't have been achieved with you as a senior civil servant?
Absolutely not, because as you know, I retired from the public service in 1994. I went and I did other things, and then, I was in the private sector. I saw how things were going. I became actively involved in various other political movements. I was, instrumental in the formation of the Alliance, as you will recall also. And then, I came back and I helped Sir John Compton, over the years also, when he was thinking of coming back into the politics. And eventually, when the NDM pulled out of the election in 2006, I assisted him by running the campaign of the United Workers' Party.
We'll come back to that much vaunted alliance with Duvet-Compton alliance. But many a cynic of St. Lucian politics, indeed politics more universally, is that often it's not grounded in a philosophy. You alluded to your having your NDM and just before the elections joining the UWP. If one would argue you're so convinced that UWP is not the way to go, your former party, what then would be the basis for belief of the electorate in true purpose when you suddenly and apparently conveniently join UWP, who you decided to oppose a few months earlier?
Now let's look at the particular era that we're talking about. This is one time, then was another. I have always had a belief in Sir John Compton and his vision, and my whole association with politics has been up to this time with John Compton. And I understood the man, I understood his vision, and remember we worked together from 1982 to establish a development path for this country. The whole question of philosophy, I think the philosophies of the past no longer are relevant to what St. Lucia needs at this point in time. And that is why the development, the philosophy of the National Development Movement is all about development. We have to be pragmatic about development, because always the issue is leads back to what the people of St. Lucia require. And I think that what is critical at this time, in this whole era of challenge, in the whole international global environment, is that a country focuses on a development path which improves the standard of living of its people. And that is why our focus as the National Development Movement is on a paradigm of development, and that's about it. We'll do what we need to do in terms of seeing where the opportunities are globally, and pulling together the right approach to enable St. Lucia to advance, enable St. Lucia to progress economically and socially. And that is why the NDM's focus is solely on development.
Yeah. I hope you picked up there on my try to zero in on a certain indifference that prevails among the electorate between, according to them, the different sides. In other words, it doesn't matter which side, there's no significant difference, which is why I alluded to you jumping from your newly formed NTN back into Sir John's camp, the UWP and so on. So it appeals to the average man in the electorate that it really doesn't matter.
You remember when the NDM was originally formed, Sir John Compton was not in the politics. And he was not.
He was around.
He was around, but he had retired. He had not expressed a desire to return to politics.
So John was re-elected as leader of UWP in 2005.
In 2005, but the NDM was formed in 2004, at the time that Vaughan Lewis was the leader of,
and there was a period where
Party.
Your unit ran parallel to his UWP.
And our unit ran,
UWP.
Our unit ran parallel to the United Workers' Party initially when Vaughan Lewis was there. Then we ran parallel. And at that time, immediately Sir John came on board. He approached us and asked us to try to come to some agreement on a merger. You'll recall that. That merger arrangement failed. At one point, very close to the election, we did a poll which indicated to us that even if the NDM, would pull some votes, it would not pull enough votes to allow it to win the election. And therefore, the choice was very clear. We could have contested the election, and we could have served as a spoiler, as I indicated before, and that would have, caused the United Workers' Party to lose the election and to allow Dr. Kenny Anthony's Labour Party to win again. And that was not an outcome that we wanted to consider at that time. And therefore, we pulled out and gave the United Workers' Party a clear shot at the election. We then, as I told you, subsequently, based on discussions with Sir John Compton, came on board with him solely to run his campaign at his request.
Right. Interesting, you raised it, that things having evolved. Do you see that significantly different now? You said, in all fairness and honesty to yourself,
yes,
the polls indicated that your force was not significant enough to win the elections, but perhaps as the spoiler and the split vote.
Yes.
How has that changed significantly?
At that time, that was the case.
Right. How has that changed significantly now?
Now, we believe that there's, antipathy towards both parties, established parties, the United Workers' Party and the St. Lucia Labour Party. We believe that what is considered the hardcore element of both parties is now down to something like 20%. And we believe that there's a vast majority of the voting population, approximately 60% in the middle, that is waiting to be convinced, that wants to be convinced by a discussion of issues and of a vision for the development of this country. Because given the circumstances that exist now in the world and in St. Lucia, that have translated into St. Lucia, circumstances associated with, economic survival, everybody is now concerned about how they live, how they put food on the table for their families. And we believe that in that environment, people are not going to be, swayed by, all the razzmatazz and all of the, the usual election hoopla. They're going to be swayed by a discussion of issues, and they need to be convinced that any organization that wants to run this country must have a clear vision for its development and must have clear strategies, to achieve that development vision, and then they must be led by persons that have the capability to manage the country's economy in particular, given the time in which we are now.
It's a statement that not many party leaders would disagree with. But what does Ausbert bring to this process, as you speak to the viewers via my medium, that would inspire persons and encourage them? What different do you bring? You having stated the general need for vision and a long-term plan and so on, that being well accepted, what is the big strength that Ausbert brings?
The strength I have is my ability to conceptualize a long-term path. For example, I start with the premise. I always start with the premise. Where do we want to be in 50 years' time as a nation? In 50 years' time? How do we get there? And then what foundation do we need to establish now to enable us to get there in 50 years' time? Because you must take a long-term perspective on development. You're talking about changing things over generations, and you must always start with that reference point. I am known to have that particular perspective and approach to development. I have 30 years of experience in development. I first...
Give me two examples of your major achievements as senior civil servant, and so that's evidence to the public of that ability.
Well, you must remember that my portfolios in the public service have been varied, have been, wide-ranging. I ran the public service. I was the permanent secretary in charge of personnel. I ran the public service. I also ran the entire development portfolio of the government of St. Lucia. So on the development portfolio side, I started by doing projects like Point Seraphin, the Roseau Dam, the land registration titling projects, the West Coast Road, the East Coast Road. Basically, I structured all of the financing for all of the projects that were in government's portfolio. And then I managed teams of persons who then, managed the implementation process. I also coordinated all the development assistance programs with all the various international organizations and agencies, and so that is my background in that regard. On the public sector side, I am probably most proud of my, restructuring of the public service and the reclassification exercise in the public service, which was, undertaken for the first time in St. Lucia and has never been undertaken again. And so I believe that, all of these things indicate that I have a broad grasp of all aspects of development of this country and management of this country.
Yeah. You've indicated that your interest as party leader, as a candidate, is of running Dennery North. Why Dennery North? Many who know you in the urban existence would wonder.
Yes. Many people know me, and probably you know me as being, raised in Darling Road and so on. But I was born in Dennery North. My family is from Dennery North. They are educators. All my family, my mother, my grandparents were educators in that area. They lived there. They farmed there. And I was actually born at Larissus in Dennery. And so in my choice of a constituency, I wanted a constituency where I could have an impact and actually do things to transform people's lives. The level of development in Castries is much greater than it is in the rural community. And there, you have levels of poverty, you have levels of need and want, you have basic amenities that are not provided in that constituency. And if I had to go into politics, I'd always have wanted to choose a constituency where I could make a difference, a meaningful difference in people's lives at a constituency level.
Ausbert Dovain, you mentioned your party, and many a critic has said that they're not overly impressed with your slate of candidates, that a party doesn't depend in any instance on one person. How do you defend that?
The slate of candidates that I have selected so far, and
how many so far?
So far 7, and some are yet to be named. They're all young, relatively young. They're idealistic, they are committed, and they are dedicated. They are all trainable. They don't have bad habits. And I think we have to bear in mind that, when you look at the slates of candidates on the other side, they are not, we cannot be particularly impressed either by their performance or, their commitment to the ideals of development. So I prefer to select persons who are committed, who are honest, who are, disciplined, and who have a sense of idealism, and help them to develop into the kind of politicians that St. Lucia needs now. I have a background of taking relatively young persons, fresh persons, and transforming them into, helping them to realize their potential, so they are transformed into excellent, technocrats and into excellent professionals. And so I have absolutely no doubt that I can continue that process with the crop of persons I'm bringing in. Some of our persons are experienced. They have had experience in the public service, and some of the others that you will see coming on board will have had experience as well in public affairs and the private sector.
You raised at the start of the program, I mentioned Ausbert Dovain being contentious as a topic for the better part of 2 decades now. You didn't and wouldn't disagree with that. But before addressing the public, there'll be certain issues that you must address, and we have been clouds. One, the obvious question, Ausbert Dovain, yes, you're ready to run a country. The stories are now well told of your many stumbles and pitfalls in your ventures, your foray into a private sector and the businesses, the stories up to recently of the rapport with the banks, the not so good rapport with the banks, and financial solvency or insolvency. How do you respond that you, who want to lead the country, did not do very well in your private business? I'm very happy
to have this opportunity to deal with this once and for all. Let me just go back and indicate that it is a fact that in 1996 my business went into receivership. It is a fact. And when my detractors address this particular issue, they all say exactly what you've said, that I cannot run my own business, or rather I could not run my own business, and now I want to run the country. The irony is that the reason my business failed is because I was running the affairs of the country instead of running my own business. Because while my business was in operation, I was working in the public service. The background is this. In 1992, I had intended to leave the public service immediately after the election. I intend to leave in June of 1992. So John Compton then prevailed upon me, persuaded me to take another contract. Now my businesses, which had been set up already and which I had expected to go out to run, I then put in the hands of other persons while I continued to do the business of the country. And so for the first 3 years, the first 3 critical years when my businesses needed me, to be at the helm, I was instead running the affairs of the country. Now the most amusing thing about this all is that the people who say so know very well that I was running the government affairs instead of running my own business, because I recall at the time they used to accuse me of conflict of interest for being in government but having businesses outside. And so had I instead done the selfish thing and gone into my business as I had intended, the story would be totally different today. But instead, I accepted the request of Sir John to stay with him for 2 more years, 2.5 more years, to do the things I had been doing with him, that is the development of the country and also the running of the public service, instead of looking after my own affairs. And it is important to make this point now, that all the people over the 30 years that have been in the public service, everything they've said about Ausbert Dauvain, and they've attacked him about his business, etc., 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 they haven't clarified, first of all, that I was running the country's affairs instead of running my own business, and secondly, they have not ever once attacked me on my competence, my professionalism, and my record of achievements in the public service. You've heard everything else said about me, but you have never heard an attack on me on my ability to perform, my competence, my management skills in government, and all of the things that I have achieved in government. My record of achievement in government has never been challenged in 30 years. People will tell you about my work ethic, my 6:30 in the morning to whatever time at night, my extensive traveling on behalf of the government of St. Lucia, and there's a strong record of achievement which has never ever been tackled at all. And so people accept that I can do what is necessary in government. They know that I can manage the government development portfolio. They know that I can manage the public service. And I must point out that in the 7 or 8 years that I ran the public service as the head of the public service, there was never one day of industrial action. Okay, and industrial relations were at the best they've ever been in the public service in St. Lucia.
Having said that, you would concede that perhaps a critic would be quick to say that it wasn't the wisest of financial decisions and evidence of management to have so wrongly delegated at the time. Ultimately, it's your business, and the business decision was yours.
Absolutely, and I accept the responsibility. I accept, I'm totally accountable for this, and I'm not running away from this. I'm just telling you that maybe in hindsight, knowing what I know now, if I knew things would have gone the way they went, I probably would not have made that decision. But at that point, I put the interest of the country first. I thought I could have delegated my business to other persons to run, and to try to review what they did on weekends when I was in the country. But obviously that did not work, and I take full responsibility for that. That was my choice. I made it, but I made it in the interest of the country, and probably that's the kind of person I am. I tend to put the country's interests sometimes before my own personal interests.
Yeah. And quickly, as you said, the clouds are there, and you express your opinion that you're keen for an opportunity to clear them. The gentlemen like Mr. Bloom Cooper, there was toiling there, the incident with your cousin Marcus Alcindor, that was well ventilated in the media. Talk quickly to us on perhaps the Marcus Alcindor, but the Bloom Cooper, let's deal
first. Let's deal with Bloom Cooper.
Yeah.
The Bloom Cooper Commission of Inquiry was a travesty, an absolute travesty. I started off in my initial statement at the Bloom Cooper inquiry by saying that I thought the whole thing had been put together to fulfill some predetermined agenda of victimization. And let's get this in context. This, leading up to the 1997 election, the Labour Party had vilified and had demonized John Compton, Vaughan Lewis, and Ausbert Dauvain. Immediately they came into office, they then set up a commission of inquiry, principally to investigate all allegations against these 3 persons. So this commission of inquiry took place in a very, very politically charged environment. And every criticism of me was destroyed by the evidence that, my attorney and my lawyers, put forward. And, it is when we saw that report, we were absolutely confounded as to how the conclusions that came out of that report could have been reached.
And that's what I was about to get to, that Cooper, his conclusions
we were absolutely confounded
was not kind to you.
No, because none of his conclusions or his recommendations or his judgments were supported by evidence or by fact. And in fact, that report was full of errors. It was full of, clouded logic. It was full of, total misrepresentations of fact. And in fact, immediately after that report came out, we wrote a rejection, a refutation of his position on this, which we sent to the Attorney General. And we up to now, we have never received a response on that, because we pointed out clear instances where he made errors. There were errors in the fact and in the documentation that he referred to, etc., etc. And up to this point, there has never been a response, and there was never a response during the time of the Labour Party administration. And that is one thing I want to indicate. I think it is absolutely wrong to have a one-person commission of inquiry. Secondly, I believe that our our Commission of Inquiry legislation needs to be revised so that it allows for a review or appeal against findings of commissions of inquiry. It does not. That is not the case now, and we need to deal with this particular issue. Because when and I maintain that commission of inquiry was set up as an instrument of victimization, because the conclusions of that commission of inquiry are not supported by facts and are not supported by the evidence that was presented at the commission.
Yeah. Would you say, Ausbert Dovain, that having gone through the inquiry, regardless, that there were lessons that you learned in perhaps the way you went about your position as a senior civil servant, that even perhaps for future persons in the post being more protected from having great power that perhaps makes you vulnerable sometimes?
No,
any fundamental lesson you learned?
The thing is, I don't know if you recall what the commission of inquiry was all about.
Yeah, I do. But I'm saying, having gone through it, on reflection.
But essentially, on reflection, I am yet to be shown, what the issues were with regard to Ausbert Dovain. And, in hindsight, you can always say, maybe we could have done some things differently, and so on. But all of the criticisms of Ausbert Dovain were totally refuted by the evidence. Totally refuted by the evidence. And, the documentation that we provided to the Attorney General's office afterwards, after that report came out, highlighted all of the areas in which we thought that there was, a misrepresentation of facts, there was, unsupportable logic, and so on. And I believe that, it is not too late now for all of these issues to be reviewed and for that report to be revised and revisited.
One, I know that that's really heartfelt as you go into politics now, being seen as an option for leadership of the country. That incident with your cousin Marcus Alcindor touched many people. The fact that he, in fact, languishing now in prison and so on, and saw you, in a sense, as a mentor. Speak to that. I think the persons were really, really, really touched by that, and it was an ugly incident, ugly episode.
Marcus Alcindor is my cousin. You said my cousin, but he's my brother. He was raised with me in the same household. As a brother, my mother considered him to be his son. Okay, and I was asked by Marcus to go to give evidence as a character witness, at his trial, and I did, and I would do it again today, if the circumstance arose today, because he's my brother, and I would always go to his aid and defense where I could. And I said at that trial that I felt responsible for having introduced him to a gentleman called Riley Graham, who turned out to be a very disreputable character. And again, I'm happy to be able to take this opportunity to deal with this matter, because Riley Graham came to St. Lucia in 1996 for the first time. He came here with his lawyers, with his lawyer, with other investors, with his partners, representing himself as a developer and an investor. Okay, he was treated that way. My lawyer sat with them, and myself sat with them. We negotiated a joint venture agreement to do a resort at Roseau Bay. Okay, they came well prepared, as representing themselves as what they claim to be, and so we took them at face value.
Your due diligence was done.
Now, I want to take this due diligence thing up directly, because you have to understand that persons who have simultaneously carrying on criminal activities don't advertise on their foreheads. And I want to give you a little chronology here, a little sequence here, because after Riley Graham and his group showed that they could not in fact come up with the money to do the Roseau Bay Resort, they subsequently in 2002 came to St. Lucia to do another development on their own. They came here to buy an ongoing major land development project. At that time they came here, they were represented by a prominent firm of lawyers, legal firm. And, representatives of that group met with Prime Minister Kenny Anthony at the time. Okay? Now, the persons from whom they were seeking to buy that property actually commissioned a United States detective agency to conduct an investigation into Riley Graham, Marcus Alcindor, who were the principals of that company. And as late as 2002, a U.S. private detective agency could find no evidence of a prior criminal record or any arrest record for Riley Graham. Now, who are we, given the resources at our disposal, to be able to determine that this gentleman was a criminal or was engaged in criminal activity when a U.S. private detective agency as late as 2002 Okay, was not able to find that evidence. The gentleman had no prior arrest record. And I must say again, persons undertaking that sort of activity don't come, with a sign saying that, hey, I'm involved in gun running or drug running or other criminal activity. They don't do that. And I've been in the development business for 30 years. 30 years now. And in my line of business, I run into a lot of persons who misrepresent themselves, who come and pretend to be or say they are developers or investors, and who, in fact, are doing all sorts of other things. And the history of St. Lucian development over these last 30 years is replete with examples of persons who have come here, who have been wanted by Interpol and all sorts of other agencies. And legal firms and lawyers will tell you they see these people all of the time. Okay, and they are, and so, this is something that happens. Unfortunately, a member of my family got caught up in this process, and that is something that I regret, every day. That inadvertently, I introduced my cousin Marcus Altendale to this gentleman, whom, I regret the way things turned out in the end.
Right. Our producers are indicating we must go to break, but it's not often you have Ausbert Dovey in this forum and to get some crucial issues cleared once and for all. As you get ready to present yourself as an alternative leader of this country, you would appreciate, Ausbert Dovey, that the clouds of financial insolvency and so on would have serious doubt in some person's mind. As you get ready to be a possible future Prime Minister, how would you respond? It's been floated by your detractors about the many judgments. Many political parties have used it and so on. Just how would you address the public on that? They now to trust you as a possible Prime Minister.
This is trotted out every time there's somebody wants to attack Ausbert Dovey. These issues relate to the business that went into receivership in 1996. Okay, all of the debts of that business to the banks are collateralized by significant assets of land and real estate. Okay, once these assets of land and real estate are sold, all the debts to the banks and the institutions to that business, owed by that business, will be paid off.
So you're saying on New Perspectives here on the record that there's no question of personal indebtedness of Ausbert Dovey on the matters that have been raised?
Ausbert Dovey at the time gave a personal guarantee to the banks about, in addition to the real estate assets and so on that was associated, okay, with these borrowings. And again, once these assets, significant assets, substantial assets of land and real estate are sold, all of these issues will go away.
You're watching New Perspectives, our first segment indeed extended with Ausbert Dovey, the leader of the National Development Movement. When we come back, his plans for running the economy and the country, that of his party, constituency of Dennery, and his view of the two other major rivals, UWP and SLP, in the upcoming race.